Hello, YouTube. It is the 9th of April, 2019, and this video is going to be about the fact that there are now Russian soldiers in Venezuela. KGB Vlad has sent several hundred over there, basically to nominally prop up the Maduro regime, his socialist/fascist dictatorship. What's interesting about this move, of course, is that it illustrates a lot of the, to some extent, cognitive dissonance and hypocrisy on the isolationist movement and in the isolationist camp, where you have now isolationists such as Jimmy Dore, but his supporters and so many people on the right and the left arguing that the United States of America has no business intervening in the humanitarian crisis in Venezuela. That you should just let the people starve there and let Maduro consolidate power and execute opponents and whatnot. That's their standpoint, basically. Human rights for whites, to hell with everyone else. That's fine. That's their perspective, right? But now I argue that it's not morally consistent, because you have one standard of rights for whites in the West and you have another for Venezuelans. But that's only actually half the problem. The other problem with the hypocrisy, of course, and the double standard is they're not even necessarily wholly isolationists, because I've seen arguments now by people that are opposed to intervention by the United States of America in Venezuela that support Russian intervention in Venezuela. In other words, the intervention to help the dictator quell the people that are starving. That's goofy to me. So, like, it's one thing to be an isolationist and say, we should stay out of there. The U.S. shouldn't go into Venezuela. I think that's dumb. I think that's morally duplicitous. But then to actually not even be fully isolationist, to actually be pro-Russian expansionism, to be like, yeah, but Russia, they shouldn't be isolationists, they should be expansionists, they should go in there and quell the uprising. To me, that illustrates just the goofiness, the grotesque moral duplicitousness or duplicity of the isolationists, and it shows that ultimately, when it comes down to it, a lot of isolationism, especially from the left end. Originally, most of the isolationists, of course, were the paleo-conservatives, the Pat Buchanan types, on the right, where they didn't think that the U.S. should intervene in the world or whatever, and they thought that the U.S. should only care about itself. This position, this argumentation that not only should we be isolationists, but Russia shouldn't, it actually comes from a position of not that America should just care about itself. It comes from a position that America is actually bad. It comes from an anti-American position. It comes from a position that Russia good, USA bad, basically. And that's shared by a lot of the tankies on the left that listen to people like Stephen Colbert, or not Stephen Colbert, sorry, Jimmy Dore, Stephen Cohen. Stephen Colbert, great, basically liberal hawk, right? If you watched his interview with Tulsi Gabbard. Stephen Cohen is what I meant to say, the Putin apologist, who argues that just because the West expanded NATO past West Germany, and they promised, and it was either Yeltsin or Gorbachev that they wouldn't, that therefore Putin's right to do anything. Like, Putin can kill as many gays as he wants and the West should stay out of it. Putin can take Crimea and it's his right to do it. Like, Putin did nothing wrong, basically, because the West technically might have broken some non-binding promise or verbal agreement that was made between two leaders that aren't in office anymore. As if that's a moral argument. Like, even if it's true, like, I'm sure there was some sort of informal understanding that was the case. So should we let all the people in Eastern Europe get brought into the Russian Empire again? I mean, like, I've seen how this movie ends before. There's this meme. I love the meme. It's how countries join NATO, and it shows three people, and they go walk up, and they're in suits, and they got their ties, and they're all smiling, and they shake hands, and there's the guy overseeing the ceremony, and it's all, everybody's happy, everybody's fine. And then it's at the bottom, how countries join Russia. And it's like some black and white picture from like the Hungarian uprising where the Red Army goes in and there's all these like, you know, little green men, as Putin would say, and they've got their guns, and you got all the women and children sitting there like starving. Like, wait, we have to live under these guys for 50 years? That's it basically. But Stephen Cohen, he looks at it and says, no, actually NATO, they're the bad guys because they expanded liberty and dignity to more countries than they promised they would. I'm like, yeah, that means that we got a better deal. That means that we had smart leaders. That doesn't mean that we had dumb. Like, that makes him dumb anyway. And I watched a lot of his interviews and everything. I'm interested in Russia. I think he's a clown. I think he's a clown of the earth. He's like that contrarian in sophomore in high school, or maybe, if you want to give them a bit of an allowance, maybe that like guy who joined the Communist Party or the Communist Youth League at university in first year and went to a few meetings, and you know, he was kind of into it and everything, and he was like, oh yeah, Russia, Putin's a good guy and everything. But people usually outgrow that, especially by the time that they enter, you know, the mainstream workforce and everything, get out of university. People usually outgrow that, and oftentimes they go in a neoconservative direction if they started out that way, because, and I feel that people go in that neoconservative direction, like Irving Kristol, I believe, and a number of others start off as Trotskyists, because if you're that far extreme and you see the grotesque contradictions and the grotesque behavior of people in that camp, the only solution that makes sense is to go extreme into the morally right camp. You don't like sit on the fence and be kind of neoconservative. You go full neoconservative, being like, no, I've actually seen some stuff, man. You know, I used to be in that camp. I know what they're actually about. We can't let them get power. We have to save the world. Like, that's why people go from Trotskyism to neoconservatism. It makes sense, because if you see the Trotskyists and you see them for what they are, oh, I gotta get out of here. You don't just like run 50 feet. You run 500 feet. You know, you go all the way. You go overboard. You know. Because you know what they're about. Whereas most people that might not have been in that club, might not know those people, they just know them as like some meme or something. But you've seen the reality. You've seen some stuff. So that's why the extreme solutions come from extreme problems often, right? So that's why neoconservatism often, a lot of neoconservatives started as disillusion with their colleagues on the left dusting the portraits of Joseph Stalin and Vladimir Lenin, Mao Zedong, Kim Il-sung, maybe actually, with the way things are, Kim Jong-il, maybe even that late, right? I mean, it's just because a lot of these guys on the far left never really learned how the movie actually ends, right? They think, no, well, if we try communism for a 63rd time, I swear it'll work this time, comrades, and of course it won't. And then, you'll have some young idealist if we try it for the 64th time. And of course, they think that they'll be the ones who get power too, right? The college angsty kid who's got like long hair or whatever, he thinks he's going to be the one who gets the power. No, it's going to be some ruthless person who hasn't read any of your Marxist books. Joseph Stalin never really read very much. He hunted and fished and, probably like lifted weights or whatever. And he comes in there and kills all the guys who read stuff. Because the whole system, communism privileges and makes sure that the most brutal person always rises to the top. Because there's no checks and balances. There's no legitimate process. It's just kill or be killed. Well, Trotsky wasn't willing to kill enough people, so he got killed. That's how it works. So, and that would be generous to say that that kid in the Communist Youth League and university would even turn out like a Trotsky figure. Trotsky actually, I believe, was a general in the Red Army. So even him, he wasn't tough enough to survive that system. So it's a joke. So yeah, basically this whole idea that we should let Russia do whatever they want in Venezuela, but it's bad if the U.S. does on the side of the people that are starving. Really dumb arguments. Just like bottom of the barrel type people that believe this stuff. And it's basically a non-starter, but the problem is that so many people do have this way of thinking where they ultimately say that, well, the U.S. has no business there. But instead of thinking, so why should Russia, they see USA bad, Russia good, so Russia can go in there. Some of them, of course, would say, well, it's not our business. If they feel it's their business, they should do it. The trouble with that is, by that logic, Russia could take over all the other countries in the world and prop up puppet states in Canada, and Mexico and South Korea, everywhere else. And, all the Americans say, well, it's not our business. Yeah, actually, it kind of was your business, because now you're going to have to fight a war when they go in to try to take you over, to solidify their fascist regime, because it's not like they're just going to let the U.S. be themselves. No, once they have the rest of the world, they'll go in and let the U.S. They'll go in and try to take the U.S. so that they can get the pomp and circumstance of the rallies, like, oh, I was the dictator that united the world. I did what Napoleon tried to do. I did what Putin tried to do. I did what or maybe it is Putin if he lives long enough and we have enough isolationists. That whole argument, right? So, no, it's in our strategic interest, even if you didn't care about the people on the ground. Even if you don't care about Venezuelans, it makes no interest handing over basically America's backyard to America's enemy. Like, again, even if you didn't care about anybody, like, I care about the people in Venezuela. I think it's a disgrace what's going on there. It's an absolute tragic illustration of what happens when you do socialism and what happens when you do dictatorship. And I say tragic, right, because it's doubly tragic, because people have died, and people are starving, and people have to leave their homes. But it's also tragic because we got like 62 other experiments from the last 102 years or whatever of what happens when you try that system. It never works, right? So, needless suffering, right? I mean, it's always, in a way, needless suffering, but at least in the case of the Soviet Union, you could say it was an experiment. We learned what happened, but we didn't know it would happen that way. That's fair, I guess, right? I mean, from a historical sort of standpoint, it sucks if you're one of the Soviet people that got gulagged by Lenin or Stalin. But, I mean, that's the first data point. We got like 60 data points now at least, right? Like, I just throw 63 out of there. There's probably more states and groups and stuff that have tried communist tyranny, socialist tyranny. It's never worked out. Never works out. Always results in a strong man rising at the top, raping all the women, torturing all the men who resist, torturing some of the ones who don't resist just to send a message. It's sad. And I feel that with the case of Venezuela, right, when we look at this, it makes no sense to say, well, it's fine for the Russians to be there. No, it is our business, because even if you didn't care about the people there, why would you hand over countries that used to be in America's sphere of influence to Russia's sphere of influence? Like, is Putin going to stop? Like, let me just ask this. If you're somebody who happens to be sympathetic to that line of thinking, do you think that if we hand over Syria and Ukraine and Venezuela to Putin, which are the current conflagrations in which he is vying for control, do you think that if we hand over those three countries to him, that he'll do some victory rally and people will sing praise and they'll talk about how great he is on Russia 1 News and other state TV, and Russia Today will say, oh, this is great, Putin's the strongest man in the world, etc. Do you think it stops there? Or do you think he then gets emboldened to maybe try to take Georgia, Estonia, Panama, Colombia, because he's got Venezuela now, right? It's a base. He can put nukes there if he wants, right? Nuke Cuban Missile Crisis. Yay, right? No, I think that all you're doing is just appeasing dictators. And we've seen this movie. We know how it ends. If you appease Hitler and you give Hitler the Sudetenland, oh, well, now he wants Poland. It's one thing after another. You have to nip it in the bud. The neoconservatives and the liberal hawks, we want to nip it in the bud. The isolationists want to let it grow and fester until they're on our border. And then, guess what? That's a war that probably wouldn't be won by America. If it's America versus the world, it's possible. It's possible America wins. Possible. If Russia has the rest of the world and there's America, it's possible that America wins. But we can guarantee America prevails by containing Russia. Do what Harry Truman said. Harry Truman the Based, he had the whole idea that wherever they go and try to take territory to control, to bring under their empire, we go and we counter them. Hey, whatever happened to that? We should go back to that way of thinking, because the world would be a lot more of a peaceful place if Putin knew that any sort of aggression would be met with strong retaliatory action, and so and that ultimately his puppets would be curtailed and prevented from consolidating power. That's basically my worldview as it relates to this issue, and I know that a lot of people that call themselves progressives in particular would disagree. And to that I would ask, well, how can you be a progressive and fight for things like food stamps in America, right? And try to say, well, Trump's trying to take away food stamps, and genuinely have concern about people that are on food stamps and food assistance, and say, well, we need better food for our kids in school, right? And that Betsy DeVos, she's trying to do away with school lunches or whatever for poor people, right? How can you make those claims from a position of genuine concern and then say, but it's fine for the Venezuelan kids to starve? That makes no sense. That's not a morally consistent way of looking at things. And so there's nothing progressive about isolationism. We should have been in Venezuela. I believe that if Hillary Rodham Clinton had won the presidency, that Putin would not be in Venezuela today. Neither would Maduro. He'd probably be underground. And Venezuela would probably be a liberal democracy by this point, because the Venezuelan people, they're not bad people. They want freedom. They want their own country. They want food. They want a better life for their families. Maduro's not going to give that to them. Putin's not going to give that to them. Putin's deprived his own country of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness in order to rob $2 trillion or so and keep the life expectancy 3 years lower than it was under communism, and ultimately make it so that the average Russian today earns less now in real terms. In real terms, it's about $9,900 a year in 2019 US dollars. In 1989, they made about $10,000 in real US dollars. That means it went down. That means that between 1989 and 2019, 30 years, they lost $100, or about 1% of their annual salary on average. So imagine that you work hard for 30 years, and after 30 years, and a lot of Russians work really hard, right? I mean, their economy is not as advanced as America's. And you have 1% less of an income, and your life expectancy is 3 years lower. Well, I got news. That equation, like that balance sheet, it balances out. So where did the money go? Where did the prosperity go? Well, have you seen Putin's mansion? Have you seen his Mercedes? He has a really nice Mercedes. His Mercedes S600 Pullman, it's bulletproof. It costs about $2 million, but that might even be an underestimate. I read reports that one of his mansions cost over $100 million, and he has multiple ones. They're all opulent. Not to mention the Kremlin. Kremlin, of course, great place, but it wasn't enough for him, of course. He wanted more sway mansions. I've read that his yacht costs at least $200 million. No, was it? It was either $150 million or $200 million. But how it worked out was that he claims that he earns $200,000 a year officially as the president of the Russian Federation, right? But just his yacht is worth what it would take him about 400 years of being the president to earn enough income to pay for, assuming he got a loan for it, and assuming that the interest rate was zero, which nobody gives a 0% interest rate loan. So even if he got the best loan in the world, the best financing in the world, he'd still have to make his income for 400 years in order to afford that yacht and nothing else. No food, no staff, no fuel, nothing. Just a yacht. No mansions. So are the RT fanboys, the Telesurf fanboys, the Assad fanboys, the isolationists, the 4chan boys, the Bernie bros, do they all believe that he is a genuine, hardworking, great leader who he's doing the best he can for his country? Or do you think he took some of the people's money at some point? Because I got news. If you make $200,000 a year, you're not buying a $150 million yacht. Like, that math just doesn't add up, right? Like, if you make $200,000 a year, I'm serious, $200,000 a year, it's a lot of money, right? I mean, that's almost top 1% amount of money. That's good. You are making bank. It would take you about 400 years. Something like 400 years. I forget the exact amount that it costs for his yacht. But when I did the math and I added up his salary, it was some absurd number of years that it would take him working as the president of Russia in order to pay for it on a loan. Well, he never stayed anywhere. He was just a mayor of St. Petersburg. It's not like he had $150 million sitting around and, he just happens to make $200,000 a year, but he has all this wealth already accumulated. No. He robbed the country, right? That's what his buddy Maduro is doing in Venezuela. All these strongmen, they all think alike. They're all buddies. They have the same game. The game is they get swag yachts, they get Benz, they get mansions, they get all the swag in the world, they get all the praise in the world, and they manage to convince with their international networks like Telesur and Russia Today, total useful idiots in the West to sing their praise. And to say, no, actually, USA bad, Russia good. Well, I got news. If you're one of those people, and that's a serious point that you find yourself arguing for, unironically, you are what, by their own admission, what the Russian government calls useful idiots. You're just somebody who's playing their game without knowing their outcome. That they win, that they get their state pomp and circumstance, their swag yachts, their swag mansions, and you get to be basically a useful idiot fool who is shilling for them and helping their aims in the world and helping their interests over the interest of America, when America's interests correspond way closer. I'm not saying that America's interests and human interests totally overlap. There are some conflicts of interest and there are some divergences, but when you compare human interests to American interests and then compare human interests to Russian interests, well, Russian interests are basically Vlad's mansion, Vlad's Benz, Vlad's yacht, and keeping Vlad's few thousand keys to power happy. Basically, a few thousand people in Russia give him the legitimacy to rule. If he keeps them happy, like the patriarch of the Orthodox Church, for example, then he keeps the swag yachts and the mansions and everything. That's basically Russian interests. American interests are free enterprise, human rights, human dignity, liberal values, etc. Those align a lot closer with human, the sort of human universal, innate preferences. People want freedom. People want to not be tortured. People want the ability to make money. They want the ability for their kids to make even more money. They want the ability to pursue entrepreneurial ventures. They want the ability to listen to music without getting accused of being an enemy of the state. They want to be able to watch TV without being labeled a saboteur. They want to just go about their day how they please and not have to attend mass rallies to sing praise of the leaders. They want to be able to sleep in the morning. They don't want to have to wake up at 6 a.m. and dust the portraits of the great leaders while the loudspeakers play mandatory music of the country and the party for everybody to listen to. So Russian interests and their allies, North Korea, etc., have essentially like a negative overlap with human interests. They're counter to human interests, whereas America is the only one of the three superpowers that anywhere near close approximates human interests. I mean, China doesn't come anywhere near close. China just imprisoned something like 1.5 million Muslims into gulags, right? Just because they were Muslim. Wow. I mean, now, of course, that's small. China executed somewhere on the order, well, altogether about 100 million people died under Mao. So to put 1.5 million people into gulags just because of their religion, well, that's actually more progressive of them than they used to be, right? Like, this is how communism works out, where even that seems like an improvement, right? That's how bad that is. So no, definitely America's a lot closer to human nature, human interest, and so it makes moral sense for the United States to intervene in Venezuela. It makes strategic sense for the United States to intervene in Venezuela. You don't hand over assets to your rivals. That's just common sense. And ultimately, the problem is it probably won't happen because Donald Trump is the president and he's basically in debt to the Russian oligarchs. So he knows. Vlad doesn't have to call him. Like, I make fun of Trump for being stupid, but Trump's not that stupid. Putin doesn't have to call him and say, hey, look, don't go into Venezuela. Trump knows to not anger his bosses, otherwise he'll get fired, right? You know, Putin will leak the tax papers, or he'll leak the compromise he's got from the hotel in Moscow. He'll leak all that stuff from the Steele dossier. Like, Putin would throw Trump under the bus, no doubt, if Trump disrespected or went against Russian interest all of a sudden, because Putin would argue, we made you. You owe us everything. Deliver on this and we'll forgive your debt. If you don't, I mean, Trump would have to worry about whether his soup's got plutonium in it or something, you know? And that's real. That's happened before. Look into it, right? This is how the Russians operate. The Russian government, of course. Most Russians are fine people who want a better opportunity, and because Putin's got nukes, we can't ever help give it to them, right? So the whole thing is just it's a joke, and so it disgusts me when I see these people out there, more so from the left, because I expected this from the paleocons. I expect this from the Ron Paul types, you know, the libertarians, which is, I mean, that's a topic for another video. Libertarians actually supporting tyranny as long as it's elsewhere. That's funny, because they're supposed to be like almost anarchists, yet they love dictators like Assad if they're abroad, right? So that's funny, but that's a topic for another video. No, this whole thing disgusts me because people call themselves progressive, people call themselves liberal, and think that America should let Russia crack down on the protesters, prop up strongman Maduro, so that they can starve people, rob the country, and get yachts and mansions. That's weak. And I want to knock some sense into the useful idiots here and say, you know, either admit you're a fascist and say, you know, you want that here too. We should have a strongman that gets the mansions and the yachts and robs the country of life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. Or come around to the liberal hawk side and say, no, you know what, I'm sick and tired of it. I'm sick and tired of living with cognitive dissonance. I'm sick of, you know, all my friends being progressive and then showing for Assad and Putin and Maduro. I'm going to become psychologically well. I'm going to be morally consistent. I'm going to, you know, do like basically what Kevin did and become a liberal hawk. You could go in that direction. And so it's a personal matter. You'll feel better if you stop showing for dictators that view you as a useful idiot. They call you useful idiots. I mean, a lot of progressives got upset when they found out that Goldman Sachs referred to some of their customers as pigs, and then bet against them on the derivative market because they knew that they were selling them bunk assets and securities, right? They knew that, and they went against it. A lot of progressives rightfully said, hey, that is unprofessional, that's a disgrace. Somebody should be held accountable for that. But I got news. Maduro, Putin, they're just like the CEO of, say, Goldman Sachs in that example. Except instead of calling you pigs, they call you useful idiots, right? So do you want to be a useful idiot, or do you want to embrace life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, and come around to liberalism and the liberal hawk moral sort of world view? So that's what I would offer to you. So thanks for watching.